Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I'd like to welcome you to The Other Side of History. Now, in this talk, we're going to talk about a man named Laurence Saunders. Laurence Saunders was an English Protestant martyr whose story is recorded in the Foxe's Book of Martyrs. Saunders saw a number of rulers come and go. He was born during the reign of King Henry VIII, and in the early years of the reign of Henry's only son, Edward VI, Saunders obtained a license to preach. Edward was the first English monarch to be raised as a Protestant. Saunders was in charge of a parish in London when Bloody Mary, Queen Mary, the next in line to the throne, began her persecution of the Protestants in England. Saunders was educated at Eton College and then went to King's College at Cambridge, where he remained for 3 years. Saunders' mother was a wealthy widow and wanted her son to engage in mercantile pursuits. Saunders did apprentice under an eminent merchant of the city, but it was not to his taste. The merchant perceived this and talked to Saunders' mother into allowing her son to resume his studies. In 1544, Saunders obtained a doctorate in theology and was soon in the ministry of the English Church. Saunders married a woman of his own rank. She proved a noble helpmate to him, and he was devoutly attached to her. Saunders was given the rectorship of a church in the city of London. The queen that became known as Bloody Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who was the first wife of King Henry VIII. Catherine of Aragon was from Spain and a devout Catholic. When Bloody Mary became queen, she was, like her mother, also a devout Catholic. Under her rule, the nation was racked with religious and economic strife. Mary was the first ever queen of England to rule in her own right. She gained the title Bloody Mary because of her persecution of Protestants, of whom she burnt at the stake in the hundreds. Mary's goal was to restore Roman Catholicism to England. Bonner was the Bishop of London at this time, and he was not slow in singling out the Protestant Laurence Saunders as a victim. Because of a sermon that Saunders had preached in his congregation, and this was on the 15th of October of 1553, he was arrested and taken before the Bishop of London. The bishop ordered him to write down his view on the doctrine of transubstantiation. Saunders obeyed, and when he handed the paper to the bishop, he said, "My lord, ye do seek my blood, and ye shall have it. I pray God that ye may be so baptized in it, that ye may thereafter loathe blood-sucking, and become a better man." End of quote. He also told the bishop that his conscience was clear. "A goodly conscience, truly," exclaimed the bishop. "It would make our queen a bastard." End of quote. Then Saunders replied that was not his purpose, and to the effect that the matter had already been cared for by authors. This reply of Saunders annoyed the bishop, because he had, in the reign of King Henry VIII, been one who had written and printed a whole book against the lawfulness of Henry's marriage with Catherine of Aragon, the mother of Queen Mary. Being made powerless to reply, the bishop called out to the officers to carry away this frenzied fool to prison. End of quote. Mary's mother, Catherine, had been the widow of King Henry VIII's older brother, and his name was Arthur. And this was before she married Henry. Now, normally the church law would forbid such a union between brother and brother's wife as being incestuous. However, Catherine swore that because she had only been 14 at the time, and the union had lasted only 5 months, during which time Arthur was constantly ill, she said the marriage had never been consummated. Accepting the word of the princess, the Pope, and this was Pope Leo X, he annulled her marriage, and he allowed Catherine to become King Henry VIII's wife. However, despite 8 pregnancies, Catherine produced no surviving male heirs and only one daughter, Mary. Henry believed that Catherine had lied and that God had cursed their incestuous marriage, and he wished to marry again to give England a son to take the throne after him. Now, before Laurence Saunders was arrested, he felt a constant dread of being imprisoned, and he was so disturbed by this feeling that he told a friend, "In very deed, I am in prison till I be in prison." End quote. Saunders knew that his arrest would end in his death, but from the moment of his distress followed a calm and peace. He described this feeling to a fellow prisoner as a sense of refreshment issuing from every part and member towards the heart, and from thence ebbing and flowing to and fro, he said. This experience, it comforted him in spirit and in body. Saunders told his wife that she should not try to obtain his release, but that she should leave him in the hands of God. He added that in God, I know, will be able to fight a good fight and finish a good course, and then receive the crown which is laid up in store for me and all the true soldiers of Christ. End quote. Saunders was kept a prisoner for 15 months and was treated with considerable severity. The keeper of the prison had orders not to allow anyone to visit the prisoner. And when Saunders' wife came to the prison with an infant in her arms, begging to see her husband, she was refused. However, the jailer was touched by Mrs. Saunders' distress, and took the baby in his arms and took him to his father. Saunders was very moved at the sight of his little boy, and the other prisoners crowded around to see the little fellow, an uncommon sight in a terrible place. Saunders said, "What man, fearing God, would not rather lose this present life, rather than, by prolonging it, adjudge this boy to be a bastard, his wife a whore, and himself a whoremonger?" End quote. And then he continued, "Yea, if there were no other cause for which a man of my estate should lose his life, yet who would not give it to avouch this child to be legitimate, and his marriage to be lawful and holy." End quote. So Saunders said this because the Church of Rome does not recognize any marriage as lawful if not performed by a Roman Catholic priest. The Roman party had denounced the marriages of the clergy in King Edward's reign as invalid, and said that all of the children of such unions were illegitimate. The married Protestant clergy did not have only their religion to maintain against Rome, but the honor of their wives and children. After the 15 months were up, Saunders was taken for examination before the Privy Council. Saunders knew that this was but preliminary to his condemnation. It was said that his heresies were well known to the council, but that he could seek mercy if done properly. Gardiner, the Lord Chancellor of England, he said, "We have fallen in manner all, but now we be risen again, and returned to the Catholic Church. You must rise with us, and come home unto it. Leave off your painting and pride speech, for such is the fashion of you all to please yourselves in your glorious words. Answer yes or no." End quote. Gardiner had supported the anti-papal policies of King Henry VIII, but rejected Protestant doctrine and backed the severe Roman Catholicism of Queen Mary. There were some that held their faith only when they could walk in it with silver slippers and with the sun on their back. When persecution came, they were willing to give up their faith. Saunders was no such man, however. He replied to Gardiner, "My lord, it is no time for me now to paint. And as for pride, there is no great cause why it should be in me. My learning, I confess, is but small, and as for riches or worldly wealth, I have none at all. Notwithstanding, it standeth me in hand to answer your demand circumspectly, considering that one of these two extreme perils is likely to fall upon me, namely, the losing of a good conscience, or the losing of this my body and life. And I tell you truth, I love both life and liberty, if I could enjoy them without the hurt of my conscience." End quote. "Conscience," yelled the Chancellor, who, being deficient in that quality, always disbelieved that it had an existence in others. "You have none at all but pride and arrogancy, dividing yourself by singularity from your church." End quote. He said, "The Lord is the knower of all men's consciences," answered Saunders, "and where your lordship layeth to my charge this dividing myself from the church, I do assure you that I live in the faith wherein I have been brought up, since I was 14 years of age, being taught that the power of the Bishop of Rome is but usurped, with many other abuses springing thereof. Yes, this I have received, even at your hands, as a thing agreed upon by the Catholic Church and public authority." End quote. "You are obstinate and refuse liberty," said the Chancellor. "My lord," replied Saunders, "I may not buy liberty at such a price, but I beseech your honours to be means to the Queen's Majesty for such a pardon for us, that we may live and keep our consciences unclogged, and we shall live as most obedient subjects. Otherwise, I must say for myself, that by God's grace I will abide the utmost extremity that man may do against me, rather than act against my conscience." End quote. "You will live as you like," said Gardiner. "The Donatists did desire to live in singularity, but indeed they were not fit to live on earth. No more are you, and that you shall understand within these 7 days. Therefore, away with him." End quote. The Donatists, they were followers of a bishop of North Africa and Algeria in the mid-4th century. Now, his name was Donatus Magnus, and he was determined to face martyrdom rather than to cooperate with the Roman authorities who sought to force Christians to surrender their holy scriptures. The Donatists refused to accept the sacrament and the spiritual authority of priests and bishops. Saunders, he welcomed martyrdom and said, "Whatsoever the will of God shall be, either life or death. And I tell you truly, I have learned to die, but exhort you to beware of shedding innocent blood. Truly it will cry, the Spirit of God rests upon you all." End quote. Saunders was taken from the council chamber to an anteroom until the other prisoners had been examined. There were many people there, and Saunders took the opportunity to encourage the people to avoid the wrath of God by refusing to bow the knee to Rome, the Antichrist system. He appealed for them to be bold in their confession of their faith, even in the face of the danger that threatened them. The council's sentence of Saunders was excommunication, and he was then turned over to the secular power for punishment. Before his martyrdom took place, he was put in a prison that was within the limits of his old parish. He was back amongst his old friends and the people from his church. They flocked to the street that was in front of the prison, and Saunders, he preached to them through the barred windows of his cell as though he was in the pulpit. Saunders, he wrote to his wife, who was forbidden to see him, and he told her, "Always remember the Lord. God bless you. Yea, he will bless thee, good wife, and thy poor boy also. Only cleave thou unto him, and he will give thee all things." End quote. The bishop went to the prison to degrade him from the ministry, and when he was done, Saunders said, "I thank God I am none of your church." End quote. While being taken to the stake, where he was to be burnt to death, a poor shoemaker came up to Saunders and said to him with tears, "Oh, my good master, may God strengthen and comfort you." End quote. "Pray for me," said Saunders. "I am the most unfit man for this high office, but my gracious God and dear Father is able to make me strong enough." End quote. As they drew near to the stake, the officer in charge of the guard said to Mr. Saunders that he was one of them who troubled the kingdom with false doctrines and heresy, but that if he would recant and be reconciled to the Church of Rome, that the Queen would still pardon him. If he refused, he would be put to death immediately. Saunders responded, "It is not I, nor my fellow preacher of God's truth, that have hurt the Queen's realm, but it is yourself, and such as you are, who have always resisted God's word. It is you who mar the Queen's realm. I hold no heresies, but the doctrine of God, the blessed gospel of Christ. That hold I, that believe I, that have I taught, and that will I never revoke." End quote. Upon reaching the place of martyrdom, Saunders knelt down and prayed fervently. Then rising, he embraced the stake, exclaiming, "Welcome the cross of Christ, welcome everlasting life." End quote. Then they bound him to the stake, and the pile was lit. The wood was green, and it burnt slowly, and this greatly increased his suffering. But he bore the torments of the flames with a patient firmness. He did not utter a cry or a groan, and presently fell asleep in Jesus. I hope that this little talk has been an encouragement to you to remain firm to your faith. I want to thank each one of you for listening, and I am wishing God's blessings to each one of you.